Welcome to the ENS Africa podcast. Today we are going to be joined by tax expert at ENS Africa, Charles Devet, and we'll be dissecting the upcoming South African budget, which is set to take place on the 22nd of February. Charles, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Ntando. Thank you very much. It's great to be talking about the budget that happens in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. So I want us to dive deep into the budget feature as we begin. There are many things that are outside the state's control. You know, we've had the COVID pandemic for the past 2 years, which has certainly affected the way the National Treasury has been planning for their budget. But more recently as well, we've had the war in Ukraine, which has resulted in the devaluation of the rand and rising inflation rates. Can you tell me more about how this plays a role in the way we plan and structure our budget?
So all those are critical factors in terms of sort of getting to a balanced budget at the end of the day. And I mean, the biggest impact is the extent of the borrowings that we as a country need to conclude, that makes it very difficult to sort of balance the income in relation to taxes and the expenditure that we have to incur, especially because of this significant interest cost as a result of all the borrowings. So what we have seen with COVID-19, we saw lots of businesses battling as a result of that. Lots of businesses closing down, which had a very significant impact on our level of employment. So that was a negative impact. Both from a tax collection perspective, also from an economic growth perspective, and then with the war, Ukraine, what we have seen is significant increase in the oil price that translates into sort of a high petrol price, and all this has impacted to have a very high inflation over the last year or so, and the knock-on effect of that is higher interest rates. So households are very much under pressure from that perspective. So the minister has to think how he manages that in terms of basic income grants, etc., to help people that are unemployed. But I think it's a juggling act between growing the economy so that we can collect more taxes and their expenditure in the circumstances. And as you say, COVID-19, the war in Ukraine, more recently, the significant economic impact of load shedding as well, means that the economy is not growing at the rate that it should do. And, that means that there are less taxes that can be collected by the South African Revenue Service. And in the meantime, there's all these additional costs that need to be paid as well. So it's a complex exercise.
Yeah, and I imagine it's particularly difficult with the need to improve economic growth, but also balance the interest of not putting more pressure on our taxpayers as well. But speaking of taxes, Charles, you say that you expect the personal income and the marginal tax rates to remain unchanged. Is that correct?
There will be some minor adjustments, we think. At the rate of 45%, the tax rate is still, reasonably high, and specifically, high if you look at sort of the value proposition in terms of what people that pay, tax at that rate get for their taxes in comparison to other countries. So, I think it's very unlikely that maximum marginal rate will be increased at all, simply because it doesn't result in significant amounts of additional income. But at the same time, it also sort of forces people to weigh up the options as to whether they shouldn't emigrate or take their skills elsewhere. So we've already seen that happen. With a number of people leaving the country. So I think that the top end rate, the 45%, is likely to stay exactly as it is. Where we will see an adjustment is in relation to inflation. So, inflation has been very high in the last little while. So, and there's always what is called a fiscal drag adjustment, and effectively that the impact of that is that if you get an inflation-related increase, then you shouldn't be paying more taxes as a result of that. So you need to sort of balance it so that the take-home pay is I mean, kind of stays the same in spite of inflation, and that's what the fiscal drag adjustment is. Typically it's quite an expensive adjustment. When I mean in the a long time ago when inflation was high and Minister Trevor Manuel was there, he used to make a big deal of the amount that he was giving back to taxpayers by way of this fiscal drag adjustment, and that's done by sort of two different things in terms of sort of adjusting the rates slightly, so all the thresholds that the rates come into play, and then also I mean the rebates that taxpayers are entitled to. So I think this year there has to be an adjustment because of the high inflation rate, and typically that I mean works to the advantage of the lower to I mean sort of a bit lower to middle classes that manages their tax bill as far as that's concerned. What is unfortunate is that it also has become very much part of sort of balancing the budget. So there are a few tools that they use in terms of balancing the budget. And I think that while we will see a fiscal drag adjustment to account for inflation, it's not going to be in relation to the full amount of inflation, simply because the minister needs the money and will have to spend it somewhere else. So a slight change in the tables, to affect the middle to lower rates in the tax tables, but nothing more significant than that.
Okay. That's really interesting. You mentioned a marginal rate of 45% for individuals. That to me seems obscenely high. How does that compare with the rest of the world? Is that normal?
Well, I mean, if you do a comparison to the rest of the world, and The Economist does sort of publish what they call a Big Mac index, and it's almost easier to compare taxes using Big Macs as opposed to South African rand, simply because of exchange rates, etc. Because it almost goes to a value to money. I mean, a value for money calculation. Yeah. I mean, a rate of 45% is not terribly high in global terms. So there are countries where the top marginal rate is higher, and sort of 50 or 60%. The difference in South Africa is that you get to that threshold of 45% at quite a low level. So it's a level of in the region of about 1.5 million rand when you start paying tax at 45%. Whereas the countries, other countries that have got a high amount as far as that's concerned, you get it to a much higher. I mean, you hit that max that rate at a much higher threshold. Sometimes, I mean, I think in the US it could be as high as 5 or 6 million rand before you start paying the maximum marginal rate. So that's the one aspect. And I sort of raised the point in terms of how much value you get from your taxes. I mean, specifically in the Scandinavian countries, the taxes are very high in those circumstances. But what is included in the tax is sort of, almost your retirement package as well. So, your and health, et cetera. So, while taxes are higher, what the state provides at a very high level of expertise is medical, is retirement, et cetera. Whereas in South Africa, I mean, people have to almost provide for themselves. So, I mean, it's difficult to do just a straight comparison at that level. I think the answer would be that from a South African perspective, our rates are reasonably high, but definitely not the highest in the world.
That's very reassuring. I feel so much better now. But that's really interesting. I want to talk about now the corporate income tax rate. I know I could be wrong, but I think last year the minister decreased the rate from 28% to 27%. Has that been beneficial to the fiscus, and do you expect another decrease in the corporate income tax rate?
So in global terms, again, even a tax rate of 27% is quite high. So what we have seen in terms of a global trend is that tax rates have come down. I mean, the average is probably closer to 23%. So 27% we're very expensive in the circumstances. So we need to bring our rates down, specifically because of the positive impact or potential positive impact that it has on foreign direct investment. I mean, in terms of the reduction from 28% to 27%, I mean, while there was a commitment given that the rates would decrease, in terms of making it affordable, they sort of adjusted some of the technical provisions around interest deductions and assessed losses so that they would, in spite of the reduction in rate, they would still collect the same amount of income in the circumstances. Now that came into effect kind of for tax years or financial years after April last year. I think it's too early to really determine whether their calculations were correct and there wasn't a difference in the tax take. I mean, my view on it is that the tax rate should decrease further, because I think that foreign direct investment in terms of economic growth, in terms of employment is important. And if the result of that is that we collect a little bit of less corporate income tax, that is in any case, relatively small contributor to the total tax cake. I mean, so we certainly support a further reduction, but I think probably unlikely in the circumstances.
Okay. And what is the biggest contributor to the tax cake, Charles? In my head, I always thought that it would be corporates that contribute the chunk of the money.
Yeah, so it's in fact individuals that bear the tax burden in the country. I mean, it is in fact. I mean, and that's why that question in terms of it was sort of the contribution that individuals make, and our tax rate, that is why that is so important in the circumstances. I mean, my recollection is that it's sort of in excess of 30% of total taxes is paid by individuals, so they are literally the biggest contributor to the to the fiscal. I'll see if I can find those numbers quickly. Yeah, so I mean, if you look at the projection for 22 and 23, 35% of the total tax collected is paid by way of personal income tax. Corporate income tax is less than 20%. So almost double that is paid by individuals. I mean, the other sort of reasonably big contributor is VAT. So I mean, value-added tax is also in the region of about 25%, give or take. So the biggest collection is in respect of tax from individuals. The second one is in respect of VAT, and obviously that's paid by individuals as well. The corporate income tax is quite far down on the list as far as that's concerned.
That is really, really interesting, Charles. But I want to ask you now about the withholding tax on interest. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, so countries pretty much, always have, taxes, withholding taxes in respect of dividends, in respect of, interest in the circumstances as well. I mean, that means that we collect on tax on payments that are made out of sort of funds that go out of the country. I think there's always a sort of momentum to increase those rates. I mean, currently it's sitting at 15%. I think one would want to, or the National Treasury would want to increase that to 20%, because that would give them more tax take in the circumstances. I mean, our view on that is that the higher you make that rate, while you may collect an additional amount of tax, we should rather be low in the circumstances so that we can attract foreign investment. So, again, I think that it's unlikely. It's certainly something that will be considered, but it's reasonably unlikely that there will be any changes as far as that's concerned.
Okay. And I know that last year, around November, December, SARS announced the intention to withdraw practice note number 31. Can you tell what is this practice note number 31, and what do you expect to happen with it in the upcoming budget?
Yeah, so I mean, on this one, we expect that the minister is going to, sort of at least announce what they're going to replace it with. So I mean, practice note 31 is an old practice note. It's very much related to how you dealt with the deduction of interest in the circumstances. So when you incur borrowings kind of to run your business, then it's deductible, and that gave guidelines as far as that's concerned. And then suddenly, towards the end of last year, in the middle of November last year, it was withdrawn without any sort of anything being put in its place. Now, we do know that there've been quite a lot of submissions that were made. I mean, there's always a process in terms of an HSC where you can make suggestions to National Treasury. I mean, in relation to amendments that you would like to see. I mean, Annexure C is the annexure in the in the document that the minister issues on budget day that deals specifically with tax changes, and we would hope, sort of on the base of the, or rather off the back of the submissions that were made by a number of companies and advisors, that there will at least be some indication of the policy that will replace this, and that we at least see some development as far as that's concerned, as opposed to there just being complete silence and then nobody's quite sure exactly what the consequences are. So we would like to see a policy statement, a policy direction about that, in kind of where they'd like to go with this, because it is important deduction. It does impact on people's ability to grow their business and to sort of stimulate economic growth as a result of that. So there can't just be this gap as far as that particular aspect is concerned.
Yeah, well, it seems that Minister Kodongwane has quite a difficult task ahead of him, has to balance growing the economy with not stretching an already stretched tax base. Maybe I must ask you, Charles, what advice do you have for the minister?
Well, I mean, I think that the minister has to do everything in terms of, stimulating economic growth. I mean, I think that we saw with the